John Kabateck for yes on Proposition 32.
Proposition 32 is being promoted as good government reform that will take special interest money out of politics. Recently, a group with ties to the conservative billionaire Koch brothers began airing television spots supporting Prop 32, saying the influence of corporations and unions in Sacramento is, quote, killing California, unquote. Good government groups, on the other hand, have cast Prop 32 as a deceptive measure, crafted to hamstring organized labor while benefiting corporations. Who's right? We'll hear from a proponent of Prop 32, John Kabateck, California Executive Director of the National Federation of Independent Business, and hear from two opponents of Prop 32, Trudy Schafer, Program Director for the League of Women Voters of California, and Derek Cressman, Regional Director of California Common Cause. Prop 32, Declaration of War Against the Unions.
From Fresno, the Maddy Report, with Executive Director of the Maddy Institute, Mark Kepler.
Welcome. No matter what side you're on, there seems to be agreement on one thing when it comes to Prop 32. It would dramatically alter the balance of power in state politics. The question is, would it make the political process more fair or more unfair? We're joined by a supporter of Prop 32, John Kabateck, the California Executive Director of the National Federation of Independent Businesses. Welcome back to the Maddy Report.
Great to be back. Thank you.
Well, let's start with the most fundamental question. Briefly, why do you think this proposition is necessary?
Well, what we're hearing from the 20,000 small business owners we represent, and frankly voters as a whole these days, is that they are uncertain about what tomorrow is going to bring them, especially economically. But they're very frustrated. They're frustrated, frankly, by the gridlock in Sacramento. We're not seeing any reforms getting done. And they're frankly frustrated by elected officials that they hope they're sending to Sacramento who will listen to them, but just aren't. So Proposition 32, the reason we're involved and we see a growing coalition, because it actually stops that direct tie between the special interests, big corporations and big unions, and the politicians. It puts the power back in the hands of the individual, the voter, and it actually holds the elected officials accountable. Voters are waking up to that with redistricting reform and open primaries. We think Prop 32 is a third leg of the stool to make sure you're earning your vote.
Well, let's get to some of the more hotly contested parts of this proposition. One of them that's garnered a lot of attention is the fact that it prohibits the use of payroll deductions for political giving. Now, critics note that virtually all of union political giving comes from payroll contributions, while virtually none of business or corporate political giving comes from payroll contributions. Instead, it comes from profits and contributions from highly paid executives. As a result, critics are calling this both unfair and unbalanced. How do you respond?
Well, first we would say that actually the payroll deductions, regardless of how they are balanced, and frankly we see corporations who actually do practice that. Paramount Pictures, for example, has for years been doing political contribution drawdowns from their employees. But regardless of
But they can't take money out of an individual employee's paycheck. That's going to be coming from a highly paid executive, or a manager might be paying that money. But they can't take that money out of an employee's paycheck.
There actually is a number of practices, actually, and we're seeing that happening with corporations like that, where they actually are doing a payroll deduction with their employees. But I will tell you that regardless of the balance, this is about putting the power back in the hands of the individual, the employee of a corporation or the employee of an actual union. It's making sure the actual person who's earning that hard dollar, especially in these uncertain times, is able to say with their own volition, this is what I want to do with my dollar, but not have that controlled.
But legally, union members have that right already. They can say no to the union. They can ask what's called a fair share agreement, and they can say they can opt out of the political contribution. They don't have to pay that. They legally can opt out now.
Yeah, well, they can opt out. We don't see it happen often. Frankly, we've heard even many people say that they could suffer some intimidation. They could suffer ill consequences. This just gives the power back to the individual to spend their dollar as they wish. And if they want to pay a check or they want to give a credit card number, they can do so, but they have the power over the dollar they're earning in the union or that company.
Well, let me ask you this. There's another aspect of Prop 32 that's received a lot of attention, and that is that it doesn't apply to common business structures like LLCs, partnerships, and real estate trusts. How do you respond to the no on 32 folks who say that, therefore, the measure contains, quote, enormous loopholes tailor-made for businesses and their wealthy backers, unquote?
Well, we would say that's patently false. Frankly, this does not have any special exemptions for unions or for big corporations. This applies evenly to both unions and corporations as it relates to that, and again stops the money tie between corporations and unions and the politicians. So frankly, limited liability companies, some of them actually, if they do file as corporations, and some of them do because they're a hybrid, then they would actually be prohibited from doing this. But this mirrors a federal law that's been in place for over 100 years, 21 other states, and this basically says, quite simply, let's stop the corporations, let's stop the unions from having that ability to directly contribute.
Is this kind of tied in with the Supreme Court's Citizens United decision in some way? Limiting, well, it says that you can pay unlimited amounts. It's considered free speech. But I guess the critics would say, listen, if you're cutting off the main source of union funding, it doesn't matter that you can pay unlimited amounts. They have no money to pay then toward those propositions, where businesses still would, because there are some businesses that are exempt, or that's not the way businesses get their money for politics. They get it from their profits. They get it from their high-level executives. What's the response?
Well, you know, one of the things that we hear out there is quite often that, and I think as it relates to the independent expenditure committees, the Supreme Court actually is the one that dictates that, and actually has what Proposition 32 does is go as far as the law of the land in California can go in terms of having that control. So, you know, that does not stop that effort, but at the same time, it significantly stops a severe tie and a severe contribution. And let me just tell you, corporations just in 2010 alone contributed about $48 million to candidates in California. Unions about $26 million. So yeah, this goes as far as all the law of the land.
The statistic that I saw was most recently was the three largest business interest groups gave $95 million. And the unions, all the unions, gave about $74 million. So companies outspend unions by about $20 million, at least in that election cycle of the last year reported. Let me ask you one last question.
Sure.
We've only got about 30 seconds left. Does this measure just cover contributions to political parties and political candidates, or does it include contributions to initiatives and propositions?
No, it does go basically, again, mirroring the federal contribution ban and 21 other states. It applies specifically to candidates. So it's stopping that money tie. That money in favors out, which I think Californians are just sick and tired of.
Okay, thank you very much. Up next, we'll talk to the no on Prop 32 side. What are their concerns? That conversation when we return. This is the Maddy Report. Welcome back. We're joined now by two folks who have been described as good government types and who oppose Prop 32. They are Trudy Schafer of the League of Women Voters of California and Cressman from California Common Cause. Welcome to the Maddy Report.
Thank you.
Well, Trudy, let me start with you. Let me start with a fundamental question. Briefly, why should voters vote no on Prop 32?
It's because Prop 32 looks like campaign finance reform. The proponents promise political reform, but in fact, it isn't that at all. For one thing, the measure unfairly creates two sets of rules for the two main kinds of contributors. It targets the customary fundraising methods for unions, and it leaves essentially untouched corporations. And then for another is that it has a lot of exemptions. People think that this might take money out of politics, but it's not going to. It absolutely has nothing to do with. It exempts the kinds of money spending that is so important nowadays, so big nowadays, by super PACs, independent expenditure committees, and they aren't touched by Prop 32. So the money will stay in politics. And then there are other exemptions.
Well, Derek, I mentioned in an earlier segment there are two aspects of Prop 32 that have garnered a lot of attention. One is the fact that it prohibits payroll deductions for political giving. Now, supporters say that unions should not force their members to support political causes that they, the union member, might oppose. How do you respond?
Well, workers already don't have to support a union's political spending if they don't want to. Current labor law and current court decisions already take care of that. So that's a solution in search of a problem. But,
so they can opt out.
That's right. On the flip side, corporate money coming from shareholders and customers, right now you don't have a choice. You know, if you buy gas at Chevron, you have no say if Chevron's going to use that money to support a political cause that you might or might not agree with. If you invest through your retirement account or a mutual fund, you have no say as to what a corporation is doing with that money. And so those folks are forced to support a political agenda, and Prop 32 does nothing to stop that.
You know, one thing that was mentioned in the earlier segment was that companies can force employees to contribute to political causes. Is that accurate in your assessment?
That's not correct. The companies are getting their money for political causes primarily from shareholders and customers. Companies and labor unions can offer workers the opportunity to contribute through a payroll deduction, and interestingly, it's Prop 32 denies that opportunity even for an employee who wants to, either for the corporate side or the labor side.
You know, Trudy, another thing that's been mentioned is this other aspect of 32, that it does not apply to common business structures like LLCs, partnerships, and real estate trusts. How do you respond to the Yes on 32 side's claim that they're just doing what the federal law allows?
Well, that just isn't enough. Prop 32 very explicitly does say that it applies to corporations. It uses the word corporations, but corporations has a very definite definition, and we've got California law that we have to follow. And under California law, things like you mentioned, limited liability companies, real estate trusts, development trusts, those are not covered by the same kind of law that corporations are covered. So this is another example of how Prop 32 looks as if it's balanced between unions and corporations, but in fact, when we think of big business, many of the entities we think of wouldn't be covered by 32 at all. No restrictions.
Okay. Derek, this measure, does it cover contributions to initiatives and propositions?
Not in a balanced way. Corporations would continue to be able to spend unlimited amounts of money on ballot measure campaigns under this. So we're seeing Monsanto spending a lot of money right now on Prop 37. We've seen tobacco companies like Philip Morris spending tens of millions of dollars.
What I had in my notes was Philip Morris spent $33.5 million on California political campaigns.
That's right. So Prop 32 does nothing to stop that on the corporate side. However, labor unions would be severely restricted in their ability to spend money on ballot measure campaigns simply because they wouldn't be able to collect the funds to do so. So on issues like employer-based health care or things like that that have been on the ballot, you would see a greater imbalance on the spending.
Well, they would have the ability to spend on initiatives, they just wouldn't have the money to do it.
That's right. So there's no prohibition on their spending their money, but just if you've got nothing in your wallet, you can't really spend it.
Okay, I wanted to ask, I'm going to give you a chance. I didn't give you a chance in this segment to give your brief description of why voters should vote against Prop 32. Why?
Well, it doesn't do what it says. Certainly Common Cause is in favor of getting special interest money out of politics, and if Prop 32 did that, we'd be all in favor of it. But what it really is an unbalanced measure aimed at taking out one interest from the political playing field, and that's actually going to then disproportionately increase the influence of other interests. We don't think that makes any sense.
Okay, well, thank you. Well, when we come back, we'll talk to those behind Prop 32. That conversation in a moment. This is the Maddy Report. We're rejoined by supporter of Prop 32, John Kabateck from the NFIB. Well, this is a third try at a union paycheck protection ban that's appeared on the California ballot in the last 14 years. The last two were in 1998 and 2005. Both, of course, were rejected. Why is this issue that's been rejected twice before back for a third time?
Well, I think what we are hearing from small business owners, taxpayers, just interested and frustrated Californians is to give up is just not an option. What we are actually seeing, again, as I said, with redistricting reform, open primaries, we're seeing Californians waking up more to saying, I want to have the power in my hands to control and make my elected official earn my vote. I frankly think in 2005 there were just too many reforms all at once. To Governor Schwarzenegger's credit, he tried to do some things too much at once. I think what we're finding now is this also, Proposition 32, reaches and frankly holds elected officials accountable on much more of a level. Contractors, state contractors must be held accountable. The political correct efforts in terms of deductions of employees, making sure that's more in the hands of the individual. But in addition to that, stopping the money tie between the big corporations, big unions, and the politicians.
Well, the critics are saying, listen, this is really a rearguard action by conservatives and Republicans to make unions spend a lot of money defending themselves, which they see this is a very threat to their existence, to take them out of the political game on other propositions and on other races. So is this what's really going on here? They don't expect to win, but what they're going to do is make unions spend a lot of money defending themselves, yet for the third time?
Well, we just think it's right for any organization to actually earn the support of the people they represent. For too long, frankly, unions and big corporations have had a few select people in boardrooms make decisions for them. This gives the actual employees of those unions, it gives the employees of the big corporations, of the big companies, a chance to say, you know what, it's my dollar I've earned. It's my dollar I'm contributing. My vote and my voice should be heard. So this is a game changer for all sides.
So let's kind of follow the money here. Who's behind Prop 32?
Well, we are seeing a diverse and pretty growing coalition of interested and concerned people. We certainly see Charles Munger, who was very much a supporter of the redistricting reform, which voters, we and the League of Women Voters and Common Cause and others joined together.
He gave about $1 million for this proposition.
It's my understanding is somewhere in that amount, but he's understanding the importance of reform. But we also have former Democratic leader Senator Gloria Romero and Californians for Democratic Reform, very, very much frustrated with how unions have been maligned over time in their leadership. Former U.S. Secretary of State George Shultz, certainly the NFIB, Howard Jarvis Taxpayers Association, and then just scores of taxpayers and small businesses saying enough is enough. It's my turn to earn the elected officials' vote.
Well, you're saying that this is being supported by a lot of small business owners, et cetera, but, if you look at the numbers, it's Gerald Perencino gave $250,000, Thomas Siebel, another executive, $500,000, Wayne Hughes from Public Storage out of Kentucky, $200,000, Munger was $992,000, and then most recently, it's been reported that a group with ties to the conservative billionaire Koch brothers dropped $4 million in the campaign, and so the number went from $3 million contributed overnight to $7 million, with the contribution, this one $4 million contribution. So it appears that more than half of the donations for this proposition are coming from a single source.
Well, we're seeing some interested parties out there. Again, within the NFIB and across the board, we're seeing people stepping up and saying, hey, let me give $20 here, $50 there. And also, aside from the money, let me make sure my voice is heard in this campaign. I mean, if you just look at the very narrative of this campaign in terms of what the opposition, which is predominantly the unions, have been raising, that's an egregious example in and of itself, a narrative in and of itself of how out of hand the spending has become in terms of the special interests. So, outspending by 10 to 1, we need to fix the system. We need to make sure the actual employees and Californians have a voice in that matter.
Well, let me ask you this. The LA Times has reported that, quote, 2 of California's leading good government groups, Common Cause and the League of Women Voters, are calling Prop 32 deceptive, quote unquote, and urging voters to vote no. Why do you think Common Cause and the League of Women Voters oppose Prop 32?
Well, I can't speak for those organizations and their boards. We certainly enjoyed, and I think a lot of the folks that we've been working with on Proposition 32 enjoyed a great deal of partnership with the Common Cause, with the League of Women Voters, when we were affecting and successfully did with redistricting reform years ago. We certainly believe this is just a step about fairness that Common Cause, League of Women Voters, and any Californian would recognize. I'm having the power to control my dollar. I'm going to make sure my elected official earns my vote. And frankly, at the end of the day, let's stop the ties between money in and favors out. And that's what we're seeing far too much.
We've only got about 30 seconds left of the segment, so I'll ask you, so if you want to take all special interest money out of politics, what about publicly financed elections?
Well, frankly, I don't think the California voter right now...
I just thought I'd ask you that.
I don't think the California voter right now is comfortable with publicly financed anything. I think right now, maybe one day we see that as something that evolves, but right now, this really is a game changer in stopping the ties between big unions, big corporations, and those that the voters in districts hope that we'll be representing them.
Well, thank you very much for being here. When we come back, we'll discuss who's behind the No on Prop 32 campaign and why. That conversation when we return. This is the Maddy Report. Welcome back. We're joined by Trudy Schafer from the League of Women Voters of California and Derek Cressman from the California Common Cause. Derek, this is the third try at a union paycheck protection ban in the last 14 years. The first 2 attempts were rejected by the voters. But the Yes on 32 folks say this one's different. How do you respond?
This one is different in some ways. When this issue has been before Californians in the past, it's been much more transparent as just an anti-union measure, and people could decide, if I disagree with unions, maybe I like this. If I agree with unions, maybe I don't. This one is presenting itself as campaign finance reform, and that's why Common Cause has actually gotten more involved with this than we have in the past. Is we feel as a leading organization that works on campaign finance reform that we have an obligation to our members and to voters to clarify that this really isn't campaign finance reform. That's not what it's about. It, like these other measures, it is a measure aimed squarely at labor unions.
Are they trying to tap into voter frustration?
I can't really speak to their motives, but certainly we know voters are fed up with money in politics. We all are, and rightfully so. And so they're somewhat wrapping up this labor issue in this bigger issue in a way that I think is confusing and misleading to voters.
Would you argue? Were you saying it's a Trojan horse? Is that your point?
Yeah, it really is. It's not what it appears to be, and if voters can take a close look at it and look who's behind it and who's in favor of it, I think they'll be able to look at it in a different light.
All right, so Trudy, who's behind the No on Prop 32 campaign?
Well, you see two of the organizations right here. A number of good government groups like the League of Women Voters and Common Cause, and a number of other nonprofits. They go from the I'll come to
Sure.
the big money is coming up. But in fact, we have California Church Impact. We have a number of groups that represent a range of different interests, and they're all nonprofit organizations that really want to see balanced reform. Now, the money obviously is going to come from the people who have money and who feel themselves threatened. And so therefore, yes, the funding behind the No on Prop 32 is from the major labor unions, public employee unions in California, and that means the CTA, the SEIU, Service Employees International, firefighters, and so forth. They see that their voices would be silenced, and so therefore that's become it's a real priority for them.
Are companies also concerned about this measure, and so they're also backing the No on 32 campaign because they see threatened?
You know why we call it the Stop the Special Exemptions Act. There are so many exemptions that there are companies who don't see that there's any harm to them from this measure, even though it's couched in terms that try to make it look as if it's balanced between unions and corporations. The kinds of groups and individuals that are funding the Yes on 32 include some developers, Wall Street executives, insurance executives, and some major groups that give money to conservative causes. We saw the Lincoln Club in Orange County that funded getting it on the ballot, and just now the news is the super PAC kind of organizations that are bringing in money from out of state that don't have to disclose their donors, the American Freedom Foundation.
Right. So it was so a fund now is, I think recently read that they gave $4 million into the campaign, which more than doubled.
Exactly. I was just going to say they've doubled the money.
Okay. Well, there are two unions in the state: the SEIU, Service Employees International Union, and the CTA, the California Teachers Association. They're some of the biggest contributors for state and local politics. What do you say to those that say that these unions and unions like them therefore have too much influence, and that influence needs to be curbed?
They do have a lot of influence, no doubt about that, and so do lots of other special or narrow interest groups in this state. You know, corporations have a lot of influence, but ideological groups, you know, the NRA, environmentalists, taxpayer groups, there are lots of interest groups floating around Sacramento. But this measure only aims at one. It's a little bit like saying, well, we're going to solve the problem of gang violence by taking knives away from one gang but leaving guns in the hands of 10 others. You know, that's not the way to solve the problem. What we would support would be a balanced approach that reduces all of these special interests in Sacramento in a fair and balanced way.
Trudy, you know, Common Cause and League of Women Voters, generally referred to as, you know, good government groups, are urging a no vote on Prop 32. But isn't there a problem with special interests in politics?
Well, it's as Derek said. I think most people in our whole country would like to see less money in politics, and I think the problem is the money in politics. The fact is, special interests do exist, but one person's special interest is another person's savior. What we want to see is balanced way of getting the money out of politics, and that's exactly what Prop 32 doesn't do.
We have a little time left in this segment. I want to ask you one last question. That is, what about taking all special interest money out of politics and going to publicly financed campaigns?
That would be a great idea that Common Cause has long supported and that none of the supporters of Prop 32 have ever addressed in a serious way. There are other things you could do. You could be increasing the disclosure of money in California politics so we would know where this $4 million came from, for example, that Trudy was just mentioning. Nothing in Prop 32 does that. And fundamentally, we need to be taking on some of these wrong-headed Supreme Court decisions, like the Citizens United ruling. The California legislature just this summer passed a resolution calling for that to be reversed. None of the proponents behind Prop 32 were behind that. So there are a lot of things we could and should be doing that really would reduce the influence of special interest money in Sacramento. Prop 32 does none of them.
Okay, well, thank you very much, Derek Cressman from California Common Cause, Trudy Schafer from the League of Women Voters of California, and John Kabateck from the NFIB. And thank you for joining us. If you want to stay current with state and local politics, you can sign up for our award-winning e-newsletter, The Maddy Daily, by logging on to our website at maddyinstitute.org. And now, another perspective.
Proposition 32 reminds me of my first taste of coffee. That warm brew smelled so comforting and delicious, I couldn't wait for my first sip. Pfft, what a surprise. It was bitter, harsh, stinging. And so it is with this voter initiative. It smells appealing, like reform, but it is not. Here's what I look for in a good law. Complex flavors. The laws that appeal to me attract supporters from all sides. That's not happening here. Nonpartisan good government groups oppose it. Transparency. I like to know what I'm getting. The better the legislation, the more we know about who's behind it. There are too many secret donors and stealth motives for me to be comfortable. Precedent. What have people liked before? Twice California's voters tasted this, and they didn't like it. Balance. Not too hot, not too cold. Our nation's founders were adamant about extremes. This throws the power balance completely off. Keeping special interests in their place is a good goal. But this effort leaves a nasty aftertaste. I'll say no to Proposition 32. This is Gail Marshall for the Maddy Report.
The views expressed in the Maddy Report are those of the individuals participating in the program and do not necessarily reflect those of the Maddy Institute, the California Channel, Casey, or Valley PBS. If you'd like to share your thoughts about the points and opinions shared in the Maddy Report, visit our website at valleypbs.org/Maddy. This has been the Maddy Report. Thanks for joining us.